In the early 1940s, the German armed forces, known as the Wehrmacht, looked upon the world with a confidence that bordered on the absolute certainty of victory. They had subjugated Poland in weeks, crushed France's powerful defensive line, and cornered the British Empire on its own island. For the High Command in Berlin, modern warfare was a mathematical art that they had mastered to perfection. The German soldier was indoctrinated to consider himself part of the most efficient, disciplined, and technologically advanced war machine on the planet. When rumors of a mass intervention by the United States began to circulate through the trenches in Europe and North Africa, the general reaction among German officers was not fear, it was disdain. To German strategists, Americans were viewed as a nation of shopkeepers, civilian workers softened by years of isolationism and the Great Depression, lacking the iron temper required for real, high-intensity combat. The diaries of captured Wehrmacht officers from the early years of the conflict reveal an intriguing collective mindset. They believed the American army would be incapable of enduring the brutality of the Blitzkrieg. However, what Adolf Hitler's generals categorically failed to foresee was not the courage of the American infantrymen, but rather the overwhelming power of a hidden industrial engine that, once awakened, would completely redefine the laws of logistical warfare. The Germans were about to discover that victory depended not only on brilliant battlefield tactics, but on the relentless capacity to produce, transport, and sustain a military force of global proportions. The first major reality check did not occur on the plains of Central Europe, but rather in the arid deserts of Tunisia in late 1942 and early 1943. Until that point, the forces of the Afrika Korps, led by the legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, had primarily fought British forces in a war of rapid movements. When the first American units landed in Operation Torch, the Germans initially managed to deal harsh lessons to the newcomers, such as at the famous Battle of Kasserine Pass. There, American inexperience was punished by the fire of German veterans. But it was precisely after this battle that Germanic officers began to notice something deeply disturbing. In any traditional military manual, a unit that lost hundreds of tanks and vehicles in a matter of days would be paralyzed for months. But with the Americans, reality operated under different laws. Just 48 hours after suffering heavy material losses, American divisions reappeared on the front lines completely re-equipped. Where the German army needed to ration ammunition, wait weeks for spare parts sent via precarious railways from Germany, and rely on the Herculean efforts of frontline mechanics, the Americans operated with an abundance that seemed insolent. German prisoners of war captured in Tunisia expressed disbelief upon witnessing Allied supply depots. They saw American soldiers receiving not only unlimited ammunition and fuel, but fresh meat, chocolates, famous cigarette brands, and spare equipment for absolutely everything. One German officer wrote in a letter home that they were fighting men who seemed to have an entire factory operating right behind their trenches. For while the Wehrmacht saved every single shell, the Americans blanketed German positions with tons of metal just to clear the way. As the campaign advanced into Sicily and southern Italy, the technological and logistical disparity became the primary topic of discussion in internal Wehrmacht reports. There was a cruel and ironic contrast within the German war machine. Berlin's propaganda showcased Tiger tanks and jet fighters as symbols of technological supremacy. Yet the daily reality of the German army depended on animal traction. Roughly 80% of all Wehrmacht logistics and artillery transport during World War II was carried out by horses. When German troops looked through their binoculars at American lines, what they saw was an entirely motorized army. From the infantry to the cooks, from the medics to the engineers, no one marched on foot if a vehicle was available. This total motorization granted the Americans a tactical reaction speed that German commanders simply could not counter. If a German defensive line was breached, the Americans advanced dozens of kilometers before the Germans could even move their reserves on foot or horseback. It was in this setting, among the rugged mountains of Italy and the preparations for the invasion of Western Europe, that the German High Command understood the terrible miscalculation made in 1941. American technology manifested itself not merely in secret weapons or exotic inventions, but in the standardization, mass production, and mechanical reliability of items that German generals considered mundane. This engine on wheels was spearheaded by the iconic 2.5-ton GMC CCKW truck, affectionately dubbed Jimmy by the Allies. While the few German trucks suffered from a lack of spare parts due to the myriad of different models Germany utilized, the American Army standardized its transport vehicles with surgical precision. A single type of part fit thousands of trucks scattered across the entire theater of operations. Alongside the versatile and indestructible Willys Jeep, these vehicles operated 24 hours a day through logistical routes organized with mathematical precision, such as the famous Red Ball Express route after D-Day. The Red Ball Express was a massive motorized supply line that utilized thousands of American trucks to resupply forces advancing rapidly through France. The system operated on roads entirely closed to civilian traffic, with strict speed rules and uninterrupted convoys. German generals, accustomed to advance rates limited by the footmarch of their infantry and the exhaustion of pack horses, were astonished to realize that General Patton's armored divisions could advance hundreds of kilometers without needing to stop to reorganize their supply lines. The American mobility overwhelmed any German attempt to establish a stable defensive line, because even before orders from Berlin reached field headquarters, American trucks and jeeps had already bypassed the Wehrmacht's flanks. The second pillar of this technological shock manifested itself directly in infantry combat, where the ordinary German soldier faced a devastating disadvantage in individual firepower. The Wehrmacht soldier was equipped with the Karabiner 98K, a manual bolt-action rifle based on a design from the late 19th century. It was a precise and extremely lethal weapon in the hands of experienced marksmen, but it required the soldier to pull a mechanical lever to eject the spent casing and chamber a new cartridge after every single shot fired. This severely limited the rate of fire in short and medium-range engagements. On the other side of the line, the American infantrymen carried the M1 Garand rifle. Designed by John Garand, this was the first semi-automatic weapon to be adopted as a standard rifle by a major military power in history. The M1 Garand utilized the gases from the shot itself to reload the chamber automatically, allowing the operator to fire 8 consecutive rounds as fast as they could pull the trigger. When a small American platoon encountered a German patrol, the volume of fire generated by the Garands was so overwhelming that German officers frequently reported in their logs that they had fallen into an ambush sprung by multiple heavy machine guns, when in reality they were facing just a few soldiers equipped with standard rifles. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. They knew that if they missed the first shot with their bolt-action rifle, the American soldier would instantly respond with a hail of bullets before the carabiner's lever could even be cycled again. Furthermore, the ease of reloading the M1 Garand with its en-bloc clip kept the American combat flow constant, stifling any attempt at a quick counterattack by the German infantry. Even the famous metallic pinging sound of the clip being ejected, which many modern myths claim was used by the Germans to attack Americans out of ammunition, was actually irrelevant. In the chaos of the battlefield, the volume of supporting fire from squad mates armed with other Garands, the mythical Thompson submachine gun, or the Browning M1918 automatic rifle made any German rush attempt during a reload a suicidal act. General George Patton famously declared that the M1 Garand was the greatest battle implement ever devised, and the German soldiers who felt the weight of its rate of fire firsthand certainly agreed with that statement in their secret reports sent to headquarters. Parallel to the dominance of individual fire, the speed at which the Americans operated after the Normandy landings in 1944 left German generals completely disoriented. To try and halt the Allied advance toward the borders of the Reich, the Wehrmacht strategy relied on scorched earth tactics. Upon retreating, German engineers systematically destroyed road and rail bridges, blew up viaducts and sabotaged ports, believing that reconstructing these structures would demand weeks or months, buying precious time for Berlin to reorganize its defensive lines. It was then that the third major shock for the Germans stepped onto the battlefield. The American military engineering battalions, known as the Seabees, and the Army Engineers. Instead of attempting to rebuild the complex concrete and steel structures destroyed by the Germans, the Americans brought the concept of prefabricated, industrial-scale engineering to the front lines. The most celebrated innovation was the Bailey Bridge, a modular system of steel trusses that could be assembled entirely by hand by a group of soldiers without the need for heavy tools or welding, functioning like a gigantic metal building block toy. When German generals blew up a vital bridge over a river and retreated, certain that they had gained weeks of respite, American engineers arrived at the site during the night and, in a matter of a few hours, erected a Bailey Bridge capable of supporting the weight of 30-ton Sherman tanks. By the next morning, American motorized columns continued their advance as if nothing had happened. Similarly, to ensure constant air support, the Americans used perforated steel planks known as Marston mats, or pierced steel planking. Allied engineers could level a field of mud, swamp, or sand and, by quickly interlocking these heavy steel plates, create a fully operational runway for fighters, light bombers, and cargo planes in less than 48 hours. To the Germans, who depended on long, meticulous, and manual construction processes, seeing advanced runways and high-capacity bridges appear out of nowhere in the middle of the night seemed like a logistical wizardry that invalidated all their doctrines of territorial defense and geographical containment. Another formidable example of this lightning engineering was the development of the artificial harbors known as mulberry ports. Knowing that the Germans would fiercely defend all deep-water ports on the French coast, the Americans and British simply built their own modular harbors in England, manufactured in enormous floating concrete blocks, and towed them across the English Channel right after D-Day. Within days, the deserted coast of Normandy was transformed into the busiest port in the world, unloading thousands of tons of supplies per day directly onto the conquered beaches. German commanders of Fortress Europe were left dumbfounded as they realized that their entire strategy of protecting existing ports had been rendered obsolete by an unprecedented display of audacity and industrial manufacturing capability. Finally, the best-kept and most technologically advanced secret introduced by the Americans was a piece of miniaturized electronic engineering that caused true terror and perplexity among German aircrews and artillery troops, the VT proximity fuse. Prior to the introduction of this technology, anti-aircraft and field artillery shells operated in one of two ways. They either exploded upon direct impact with the target, or they used a mechanical time fuse, which required artillerymen to calculate the enemy aircraft's altitude and adjust an internal clockwork mechanism inside the shell, so it would detonate after a certain number of seconds in the air. This resulted in a massive amount of wasted ammunition, as hitting the exact altitude of a moving bomber or fighter was a thankless task. American and British scientists managed to create a complete radio circuit, with transmitters, receivers, and a battery, small enough to be installed inside the warhead of an artillery shell. When fired, the shell emitted continuous radio waves. As it approached any solid object, such as an enemy plane or the ground itself, the reflection of the radio waves triggered the mechanism, causing the shell to detonate at the exact ideal distance to inflict maximum destruction via shrapnel. In anti-aircraft defense, the proximity fuse increased the efficiency of Allied cannons by over 300%, decimating Luftwaffe aircraft formations and protecting Allied ships from high-altitude bombing attacks. When the Americans began using this technology in field guns during the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, the effect on German infantry was catastrophic. Traditionally, soldiers protected themselves from artillery fire by diving into deep trenches or open foxholes because standard shells exploded upon touching the ground, directing most of the shrapnel upward and outward in a conical shape. With the VT proximity fuse, American shells detected the proximity of the treetops or the ground itself and exploded in a calculated manner in mid-air, just a few meters up, directly above the German trenches. This rained a deadly continuous shower of incandescent iron jagged shards and wood splinters straight into shelters that were previously considered safe. Surviving German officers were left in complete shock, reporting to high command in Berlin that the Americans had developed a supernatural aiming method, or a mysterious new weather weapon, for it was impossible to comprehend how Allied artillery managed to detonate with mathematical precision in the air, right on top of their camouflaged positions in the darkness of the dense Belgian forests. The security of this technology was so critical that the American government banned its use in territories where a dud shell could be captured and reverse-engineered by the Germans, only releasing it for land use when final victory was already sealed. The technological shock suffered by Nazi Germany at the hands of the United States proved that modern warfare would not be won solely by the isolated tactical brilliance of generals or the ideological fanaticism of indoctrinated troops, but rather by the seamless fusion of cutting-edge scientific innovation, absolute mechanical standardization, and an incomparable industrial capacity that transformed the European battlefield into a relentless, automated and devastating assembly line toward total and unquestionable Allied victory.